much. Best of luck in your round.
Thank you. Right. So, for a quick introduction, my name is Kevin. I'm going to be the first speaker for the affirmation affirming the topic that the United States federal government should significantly increase its tariffs on electric cars manufactured in China. For a quick
It's reduce.
Oh, sorry. Significantly reduce. What did I say?
Increase.
Increase. Sorry, I meant reduce. Yeah, my bad. Right. So for a quick overview, I'm going to go on to framing stuff and then our two contentions. If everyone's ready, I'll start my time. All good? All right. My time starts in 3, 2, 1. Judges, I'm proud to affirm the topic. Let's first go on to some definitions and framing issues. First is on the word of significantly reduce. We're going to say that significantly is probably going to be about a 75% reduction. As we see currently, Trump has imposed a 100% tariff on all Chinese electric vehicles. We say that we reduce it down to 25%. The second framework point is on what electric vehicles are. Judges, I'm sure you know this by now, but electric vehicles are cars powered by electric motors produced by a battery, like a Tesla, for example. The third framing issue is the weighing mechanism of this round, which I say is net benefits. It's basically which team provides the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. I believe this to be an intuitive weighing mechanism since this is a policy round. So judges, let's get on to some background or status quo analysis. We have 3 points here. First, what's going on right now? We see that electric vehicles in the United States are basically a status symbol, with less than 1.4% of all cars being electric vehicles. We see that the reason why they are status symbols is that they are so darn expensive. The average new electric vehicle currently in the United States is $60,000, more than $15,000 more than an average gas car in America. Moreover, we see that 83% of electric car owners are earning way above the median average income currently in the United States, meaning that they have the money to afford these electric vehicles that aren't usually affordable to most American citizens. The second background point here is that EV density maps shows this. We see that EVs are primarily concentrated in finance areas or wealthy areas, such as SoCal, the Bay Area, New York, etc. We see that once again, the reason why this is because only high earners currently, people who earn way above the median income in America, can actually afford these electric vehicles. The third background observation is that Tesla remains dominant in currently the United States market and worldwide. Moreover, we see that Tesla has a brand name associated with it that makes it a basically luxurious car that's the best option for people who can afford it. With these 3 background points gone, let's go on to our 2 contentions. Our first contention is going to be on the cost of a new vehicle. Let's firstly go on to the uniqueness or what's going on right now in the world. The first point is that less than 15% of the United States drivers can actually afford EVs right now because once again, they're just really, really expensive. Even with government subsidies that are going away under the Trump administration, these cars still aren't very affordable. Right, again, these $16,000 figure is after all the government subsidies that it goes through, meaning that it's still not affordable for most Americans. That $16,000 is like their average salary every year. The second uniqueness point is that past the upfront cost, EVs are actually going to be cheaper than gas cars, meaning once you overcome that $60,000 threshold, it's going to start earning or basically paying for itself. We see that firstly, electric vehicles are 4.8 times more energy efficient than gas cars, meaning they have better mileage. We see that on average, an electric car owner saves $650 every single year on purely gas money. And apart from the financial cost, we see that electric vehicles are just basically cleaner, they drive smoother, and they are more quiet, meaning that they are preferable after getting past that upfront cost. The third uniqueness point we see here is that Chinese electric vehicles are much, much cheaper than American alternatives. We see that due to the industriousness of China and its pure production facilities, the EVs in China are dirt cheap while being the same quality as American cars. We see that BYD, China's biggest EV company, has models, really good models for only $18,000 USD. Even with that 25% tariff, it's going to be vastly cheaper than most cars that Tesla can produce, if not all the cars that Tesla can produce. Moreover, they are not sacrificing efficiency for this cost. We see that they have nearly 91% of the torque generating power as the average Tesla Model Y, meaning that they are not compromising on the efficiency of these cars for the cost, but that they are purely just cheaper. So let's go on to the links, which basically explains what happens after the plan passes. We see firstly, there's going to be Chinese cars flooding the United States market. The second link here is we see that this is going to be a lot more affordable for the average American. Judges, imagine you're living paycheck to paycheck, $60,000 every single year. You purely cannot afford a car that costs your annual salary. While on here, you have the alternative of a Chinese car that costs $18,000, maybe $25,000 with all the shipping costs and tariffs applied. Obviously, judges are going to be going for those electric cars. But thirdly, some of these electric cars are going to be cheaper than gas cars themselves. Look towards the fact that new Hyundai and Honda models are still going to be around $30,000 to $40,000, which is significantly more expensive than these Chinese EVs. The impact of this is going to be obvious, in which the cars are going to be cheaper for the American people. We see that currently 11.1% of America is living below the poverty line, meaning that they are once again living paycheck to paycheck and having to sacrifice things like having good food on their table in order to sacrifice for gas prices and things like that. We see that we reduce the amount of poverty spent in gas prices, which could cost thousands of dollars every single year, by allowing them to purchase cheaper electric vehicles up front that literally saves them money over time. This is going to be obvious. The second contention is going to be on climate change. Let's see what is happening right now with our 3 uniqueness points. Firstly, we see that transportation is really bad for climate change in the United States. We see that greenhouse gas emissions are currently running rampant in the United States and other countries, and we see that internal combustion engines, or gas cars, produce 10% of the entire world's climate emissions. This is going to be really bad. The second uniqueness point here is that currently there is a lot of bad climate change issues happening abroad. Firstly, we see that the ocean is getting more acidic, which is really bad for coastal populations that rely on fisheries to produce them with their local economy. Moreover, the UN stated that by 2030, climate change will be irreversibly bad for humanity, which is something we obviously aim to reduce in today's round. The third point here is that internal combustion engines are going to be significantly worse than electric vehicles. Let's look towards 3 reasons why. First, we see that electric vehicles have no tailpipe emissions. Once again, they run on electric motors, which means that they have no emissions coming out or smog coming out of their tailpipes. This is going to be really good for local impacts. We see that currently in and around the Bay Area, there's a lot of smog, especially in San Francisco, and moreover, we see that on a numerical basis, 1/3 of new asthma cases every single year is caused purely by gas cars and their tailpipe emissions, which we need to aim to solve. The B sub-point here, the second thing that explains why EVs are better, are that Earth Justice tells us that new EVs produce half the greenhouse gas emissions of gas cars, even when produced in China and other places. The links here are once again going to be obvious. New Chinese cars are going to come into the market, and there are going to be a lot more electric vehicles in America. The impacts here are that there's less smog in these communities, there's less asthma cases from tailpipe emissions, and moreover, we just see an overall reduction of more than 10% of all the global greenhouse gas emissions. Therefore, judges, on the reasons of economy and climate change, I compel you to vote for the affirmation team. Thank you very much.
Then I'm going to go and introduce our arguments, and then I will go over the axe case. Okay. So judges, everyone, I'm very proud to negate today's topic, and I will start by moving into our framework and a bit of topic case to start off today's speech. So our framework for this debate is we want to focus, we agree about net benefits and that framing for the debate, but we want to focus a lot on long-term stability for the U.S. environment and the U.S. economy. So these net benefits are talking about the future, not just immediate impact, and how sustainable our plan is overall. So, but other than that, we agree with all of their definitions and of their other framework for this debate, and yeah, we concede all the stuff they said about the SQUO. So, moving on to our first argument, which is we need to protect and develop the current domestic industry. So, high tariffs protect U.S. jobs and industries. The future of electric vehicle production should be in America, and tariffs provide domestic manufacturers like General Motors or Ford a competitive advantage against these Chinese electric vehicles that we are importing here. So as they said, these are much cheaper, but we need to focus on developing our domestic industry. And why is this? This is because we cannot be solely reliant on other countries and the products that they give us, because that is simply not sustainable for the United States. Especially in a country with so much geopolitical tension right now, it is not sustainable for us to be completely reliant on China. So this ensures sustainable employment opportunities. Reducing the tariff by such a significant amount, 75%, is going to slam the U.S. workforce because so many people's jobs are relying on the auto industry right now. It is a huge industry where so many people rely on this to feed their families, to support themselves, and by taking it down 75%, and as they said, flooding the United States with these Chinese cars, that's going to slam people and have them get laid off. They're not going to have enough money to support their families, so we need to focus on making the current auto industry in the United States more robust to provide people with these jobs and keep them sustained. So also, it creates a more robust supply chain for electric vehicles in the United States. It provides us that long-term resilience that won't be subject to geopolitical risks. As I said before, China is a country right now that is having a lot of tension with other countries, and say like something goes wrong, like they have a conflict and they need to cut off supply to the United States. What are we going to do if we are completely reliant on the electric vehicles from China? The auto industry is a huge industry that brings us so much money. Like, it's really, really important industry, and being reliant on another country that is so tense with others right now is completely unsustainable. And tying that back to our framework, we want to focus on something that's going to be sustainable for us long term, and that means creating a domestic industry that can sustain ourselves. We want to provide the United States with sovereignty for the auto industry, and that is not going to happen if we are completely reliant on China. And also, by leveling the playing field and taking away the advantage from Chinese industries, it allows us to grow and develop industries in the United States and create our own standards for what creating electric vehicles should look like, because we agree with their framework about not their framework, the impact of the environmental standards, and by like actually having our own industry, we can control how we are actually creating these electric vehicles and set the standards for what it means to be a sustainable auto industry. And we can focus on local suppliers, and as we grow the U.S. industry, we create a better, more ethical and efficient industry, and then I will connect this to my second and third arguments. So the second argument is that we can push China to become more environmentally conscious. These tariffs will not only target the auto industry itself, but also act as a carbon tariff targeting the greenhouse gas emissions created by China in making these imported goods. We can price the electric vehicles correctly to account for the negative impact on the environment that their production causes. So I will talk more about this in my refutations, but creating an electric vehicle, as they do in China, actually does a lot of harm to the environment. And even though it may not be as much as a gas car, we're not talking about gas cars, but creating the electric vehicle itself does have harms to the environment. It is inevitable. So if we are creating so many of those vehicles, then we need to be having a carbon tax on China too, to actually tell them how much it's harming to our environment. Yeah.
Do we currently have a carbon tax?
Well,
on China?
It's part of the tariff. That's what we're saying, because that's what they're doing, is creating carbon by making these electric vehicles, and by providing tariffs on the imported goods that they are giving us, we are creating a carbon tax on the products. Okay, moving on to the third argument, we are cutting the support of unfit businesses and trade practices. So by having these tariffs against China, we can retaliate against their unfair practices that is harming both ethically, morally, environmentally, that is harming on our world. So China uses forced transfer of tech, currency manipulation, subsidization of state-owned enterprises, and a bunch of unlawful practices that is actually setting a really bad standard for what the auto industry should look like. And by removing these tariffs and having all these imported goods and just completely being reliant on that industry, we are saying it is okay to do that. All of that immoral stuff is okay, and we are supporting that industry because we are giving it so much money. We are having everyone in the United States giving them Chinese cars, but that is masking how bad these practices are and the standard it is setting across the world. So tariffs are an instrument to address these things. It prevents them from undercutting U.S. companies, and as I was talking about before, by supporting the domestic industry, we can set our own standards for what electric vehicle development should look like, and we want this to be a long-term impact. We want to create the best, most sustainable practices we can, but we can't control what China does. We cannot control how they create their auto industry, how they run it, the practices they use, the way they are creating these vehicles, but we can do that within our own government, and that is such an important point, is that domestic sustainability and the creation of practices that are going to be beneficial for us long term. And again, by having China undercutting us like this, we are giving away our leverage, and we cannot have it like that because we want to keep our leverage. We want to make it acceptable for us to actually make China understand what it means to have these better practices that are going to be more sustainable for our environment, for our economy. We want to be setting these standards across the world, and the U.S. is such an influential country that if if we support these like unlawful practices, then we are telling the whole world that this is okay, and we are just sucking off the benefits of what China is doing to like all these people that is completely unfair. Okay, moving on to our refutations. Okay, so their first argument was about cost, and they just talked so much about how it is so hard for people to afford these cars and how China makes them a lot cheaper. And we agree that China is a lot cheaper, but Judge, lower cost comes at a price. It makes sense in itself. You cannot just say, oh, it's just cheaper. Like, why is it cheaper? Why is it so much cheaper if the practices are not being overlooked? If they're not overlooking environmental and ethical standards. And as I said in my third argument, they are using these unlawful practices. That is why they are so much cheaper. That is why they are able to get away with such lower costs. And they didn't really mention that, I mean, they talked about the impact of this argument being like overall that these electric cars are cheaper or more like environmentally friendly. And if they are cheaper, then more like people can have them, and so it would be better for the environment. But if China is using like bad practices for the environment, that is just an argument against itself, because if we are supporting these practices and allowing these practices to take place, that is actually harming the environment, so that is a turn for their impact on that argument. And then their second argument was about climate change, but what I failed to mention is how harmful it is to the environment to actually create these electric vehicles. All of this disruption to natural habitats to get the minerals and things that they need to make the electric cars is so much harmful, does so much harm to the environment that is not necessarily just from the gas. Thank you.
Alright, good speech. So many things.
No. Yeah.
Do you want to switch, or how should I? Or I can just give my speech from you. That sounds good. Alright. No, it can't.
Okay.
Order for the speech before I start, it's going to be kind of going on to top of case and an overview of today's round. Then I'm going to be going on the negation case or the opposition case, and then I'm going to be going on to the affirmative case. Is everyone ready? My time will begin now. I ask you to vote for whichever side creates actual, tangible impacts for the people of the United States and the people of the world, and that is the affirmative in today's round. Don't let the opposition's rhetoric of protectionism distract you from our actual goal, which is protecting our environment and protecting the people of the United States and across the world from these terrible tailpipe emissions that gas cars are causing. Climate change is the biggest issue in this round, and we need to be solving it now in order to actually save lives. So first, on to top of case, our opponents basically say that we should be focusing on long-term stability. We would argue that we should probably be focusing on short-term deadlines, such as the 2030 point of no return for actually being able to solve climate change. The only way that we can actually ensure long-term stability is if we take short-term action now in order to protect our environment. But now on to our opponent's case. Basically, their first contention is on the idea of developing domestic industries, and we say that the overview response for this contention is that this hinges on the idea that reducing tariffs means that the United States becomes entirely dependent on Chinese electric vehicles, which is basically not true. Look to the fact that Kevin tells you that Tesla is already a brand name in the United States. Teslas are seen as basically the largest producer of EVs in the United States. They are seen as a status symbol for people who can actually afford them. People who can afford Teslas will continue to buy Teslas. They will continue to buy these luxury American EVs that are being created. The only differential is the people who previously could not afford electric vehicles and were basically resorting to gas cars, but now when Chinese EVs enter the US markets, these people are going to be able to afford electric vehicles because they have this cheap Chinese alternative. Teslas will still exist, these US luxury brands will still exist, and people will still be buying them. Yes?
If all the cars are so cheap, then there will be no incentive to develop the current domestic industry.
I'm going to be going on to this later, but this actually increases the incentive to develop industries. So our opponent's second kind of point under this argument is about dependency. We say that dependency will not happen. Next, they try to tell you about jobs. They try to tell you that people will actually lose a lot of jobs. This is empirically untrue. Throughout history, when we have let other industries enter the United States, other countries' industries enter the United States, they have historically led to more jobs. Look to in the 1970s and 1980s, before that, the United States was really scared of these Japanese auto manufacturers like Toyota and Nissan. But when the United States let Toyota and Nissan enter the United States, there was a short-term decrease in jobs in a lot of these areas, in a lot of these companies like Ford. But what ended up happening is when we welcomed these industries from other places in, they actually built manufacturing plants in the United States because now their products were more acceptable in the United States. They were more welcome in the United States. What happens when these countries and these other automakers build manufacturing plants in the US? Jobs come to US citizens. People in the United States are able to work at these efficient, good auto manufacturing plants, and they are able to get money and get jobs. In our world, jobs are being increased. But we say that in the world of our opponents, jobs are decreasing either way. Look to the fact that working in manufacturing plants, look to the fact that right now, US industries are stagnating quite a lot because there is no one to compete with. There is no other power that is creating actively better, cheaper cars, which means that these industries are stagnating. There is no incentive for them to improve. There's no incentive to better appeal to the people of the United States. But when we have this competitor actually enter the US market, it's going to encourage these factories and these auto manufacturers to make better products so that they can outcompete China. We lead to better cars being created and more jobs. But now onto our opponent's second argument. They're basically talking about this idea of pushing China to reduce its carbon footprint and creating electric vehicles. First of all, let's do a true world analysis here. In our opponent's world, China will still be producing electric vehicles, but none of them will be coming to the United States because the United States is basically not they have all of these tariffs that prevent them from actually accessing these vehicles. We say that this still ends up happening in our opponent's world, but then we also say that the United States has probably worse practices for creating electric vehicles because they are simply much less efficient and they have just overall been less efficient in doing so. But then we also say that in our opponent's world, people are going to be less incentivized to actually get and buy electric vehicles, which are much lower in carbon footprint than these gas cars. Our world is the only world that makes electric vehicles more affordable for people. Look to what Kevin tells you about how the carbon footprint of electric vehicles is 1/2 the carbon footprint of normal gas cars, and we also say that they have significantly less tailpipe emissions and contribute much less to things like asthma and things like sickness in the United States. So we see that on net, even though it may cause some carbon to actually create these electric vehicles, on net electric vehicles are much better for the environment and much better for people's pockets. Now our second kind of, our opponent's third kind of contention basically relies on the idea that these tariffs are basically key to punishing China and reducing their unfair trade practices. The overview for this argument is that first of all, tariffs have existed. There are 100% tariffs right now, and our opponents cannot prove to you that these trade practices have gotten better as a result of these tariffs. We say that they are probably just making trade practices worse. When there is pressure put on these industries, when there is a lot of pressure, when they're not getting money in markets like the United States, they're more likely to take these cost-cutting measures that are going to be much worse for actually manufacturing products. They tell you that this is immoral. We significantly outweigh on the fact that it is our moral obligation to protect people from the issues that climate change causes. We also tell you that the United States also subsidizes electric vehicles and is using tariff money for tax cuts for the rich. So we tell you that the United States also has unfair practices. This is non-unique, and our opponents cannot solve for this. But now let's go on to our case and let's look at a few key concessions. First, our opponents concede the fact on our first contention that the cost of new electric vehicles is going to decrease significantly in our world. When people have these cheaper cars from China that our opponents have conceded and completely dropped are cheaper and much easier to access, when people buy these cars, they're more likely to actually get EVs instead of gas cars, and that reduces carbon emissions, and that basically allows them to save money on things like gas that they would have spent on if they had a gas car, but now they have a Chinese EV that is much much cheaper and that they can actually kind of access. Now, we tell you that the impacts of this are going to be poverty, making sure that people don't have to make terrible decisions between healthcare and food and school and things like that. And we see that we don't want to be dehumanizing people in poverty. However, the second main contention that our opponents completely drop is this idea of climate change. Their only real refutation to this is the idea that EVs are also bad to manufacture, but to the point at which they completely drop that electric vehicles have a net lower carbon emission than gas cars, and that we make electric vehicles more accessible. We are going to be winning this idea of climate, which is the biggest impact in this round. Look to the facts we tell you about asthma and just overall protecting people's health. For all these reasons, it's a clear vote for the app. Thank you.
Affirmation ready?
Yep.
Okay, judges ready? Okay, so first I'm going to just give a brief off-time roadmap. I'm going to be going over refutations, counter-refutations, and then I'm going to review the arguments and kind of just try to summarize the main points of this debate and what it really comes down to. Okay, so you may begin on my first frame. Okay. I stand strongly on the negation side of this debate regarding the notion that the United States federal government should significantly reduce its tariffs on electric vehicles produced in China. So their plan in their world is to reduce by 75%, just to review. And their first argument regards the cost and the whole industry and how reducing costs will make it more accessible to the American people. And they talked about less than 15 people being able to afford EVs right now, which is completely true. And they talked about how Chinese vehicles are currently cheaper than the US vehicles and can be as cheap as 18K. And they said that with their 25% tariff, maybe it goes up to like 20K. But again, even still with a 100% tariff, these vehicles are still affordable. Even if we double the price of it, it's still less than that 60K landmark that they placed. They said that a lot of these, like Tesla, they kept referring to Tesla, is like 60K, and we know that that's outrageous for the average American citizen, but even a 30K vehicle is really not that crazy, because that's even new. Imagine getting that used, that cuts it down to 20K. I mean, that's just one point, but the main point of our debate is how we're going to be able to develop the US auto industry, but that's just a little side note, okay? So the affirmation talked about how there will be this huge flood of Chinese vehicles into the US, and the judge, that's the main issue with not imposing tariffs. It's this flood of these vehicles. While this may not seem like an issue, we'd be setting up the US auto industry for failure as more and more of these Chinese vehicles flooded, and as we give them more demand for these Chinese vehicles, more and more of these unethical and not environmentally conscious factories will be popping up in China. So the impact of this, again, is seen in multiple ways. So number one, there are going to be jobs affected in the United States because it will decrease the US auto industry whether we like it or not. There's no way it can help the US auto industry. They talked about Nissan and Toyota and how they came into the US, but the thing is that those brands were Americanized, whereas we're talking about Chinese brands that are being made in China and not being made in the United States. We're not talking about bringing them into the United States, as in the factories. Yeah.
Sorry, could you tell me specifically what the word Americanized means in this context?
Well, because basically what you guys said in your speech is that they started being manufactured in America as well. Whereas in this debate, we're talking about cars that are being manufactured in China. So really, we're not bringing any manufacturing to America. So how are we supposed to benefit off of this? Our US auto industry is going to crumble and the US brands will be in less demand. Okay. Second issue, which my first speaker touched on, is the geopolitical tensions. So when we rely on this country, we rely all of our auto industry on this country over the years as the demand increases for Chinese vehicles. We're putting all of our reliance on China. And as we've seen, there's a lot of tension with China already. And if that tension increases and something happens and China decides to change the way it's doing this industry that could really affect all of the American people who are relying on China. Because essentially what we're doing in the affirmations world is we're giving China all of the control, and that should not be the case for a country like the US, which should have control over its own industry, considering how prominent we are right now in the world. Okay. Third issue is that it gives China an unfair advantage over, again, other auto industries, and allows China to do essentially whatever it wants, as there will be no competition. And that's an issue which I'll talk about in the environmental impacts, but it's an issue because we have to be able to even this playing field so that we can make way for better and more ethical and auto industries. And they're talking about how they want to give accessibility to the American people. And we completely agree with that. We want that too, because we completely agree with the fact that EVs are essential to a climate-conscious future. But the thing is that if we continue to develop the US auto industry, what prevents us from being able to achieve lower costs? The thing is that right now, we have not really been, we have not had the chance to really develop our US auto industry as we put more and more control in the hands of China. But if we are able to even out this playing field, we can actually put more control in the US and actually allow our own industry to gain more power and gain more more of a foothold in the auto industry and create our own practices, our own sort of principles for how we're going to do our own auto industry. It doesn't mean that we're going to be stuck at a 60K, 40K price for eternity. The electric auto industry is a relatively new thing, and we have to give it time in the US to actually be able to develop, and by doing that, that means that we have to impose these tariffs, because we cannot allow China to have all of this control because of the many negative impacts it'll have on our country. Okay. Again, they talked about Tesla still being prominent, but then they also said that Tesla is only for the rich. And I'd also like to say that with the current state of Elon Musk, Tesla is actually dropping and becoming less and less prominent, as we've seen. And also, the issue with Tesla is that, again, it's only for the rich right now, and there are so many other brands that are now coming into this market, even in the US. Like brands like Hyundai and more affordable brands, even other luxury brands are creating more affordable options than Tesla, and the only thing is that Tesla was the first, so of course right now Tesla is prominent, yes.
What's the cost of an average electric car in America, not specifically Tesla, just all electric cars?
I can't tell you that off the top of my head, but you guys were talking about Tesla, and that's just something that I'm saying because you're saying that it's still going to be prominent, and I'm saying that other brands are able to compete if we give them the chance. And those brands will have lower costs because an electric vehicle doesn't have to be as luxurious as a Tesla. I mean, you see the interior of a Tesla, it has all of this unique technology. To have an electric vehicle doesn't mean it has to be luxury. We can make it much more simple than that and still have it be electric. We just need to make it in our own industry where we can control the impact it's having on our environment and the ethical impact it's having. So now I'm going to talk more about the environmental impacts because I also agree that it's a major point in this debate, and also just for the future of our world, it's a very important thing. And we also want to reduce these climate impacts, and this is how we outweigh the affirmation on this point. We agree that EVs are essential, but we need to think about how these Chinese EVs are made and how we can pave a future for American EVs to be made that are more actually made for with better practices. We talked about how setting these tariffs upon China, we're basically making them pay for the amount of impact they're having on the environment. As my first speaker stated, we're putting this tariff on these Chinese vehicles because right now they're not paying for the amount of damage they're doing. When they're selling these extremely cheap vehicles, we need to put this tariff on them so that they're inclined to make a change as well. So in our world, not only are we impacting the Chinese industry, we're also allowing for growth in the American industry so that both industries are inclined to be more environmentally conscious, whereas in their world, they're going to keep continuing these very harmful Chinese practices in China that we have no control over. And in the American world, we're just going to see a decline in the auto industry where we have we don't have a say in the auto industry, aren't able to set a new standard and set a new principle for how we're making these electric vehicles and allow us to actually have a chance to make a difference. And that's the point of our tariff. The point of our tariff is not to get rid of this electric vehicle business. It's not to say that, we're going to just stop getting electric vehicles. The point of tariffs is to put a tax on these electric vehicles that are causing a negative effect and create a level out the playing field and allow the U.S. industry to have a chance to catch up and create a better future. Thank you.
first moving into some quick counter refutations just to re-strengthen our own points. So they refuted our first argument about strengthening our own domestic industry by saying other cars like Tesla still exist, but there will be no shot at competition for American cars if everyone is just going to be attracted to these cheaper, more affordable options. And I'm going to talk more about this in my way, but they're framing this as if, oh, everybody's going to have access to these cheap cars, so then everyone's going to go for them. Everyone wants these cheap cars, so that's just taking away all the competition and all the chance for success for American companies like Tesla. So no, that's not true. They said that people are not going to lose jobs because they will welcome jobs and there will be competition. But if everyone buys these Chinese cars, these companies will lack the subsidies to develop their own industries, and they will not actually have the chance because they lack the demand from the American people. They will actually not have the resources that they need to develop their own industries. And then moving on, they refuted our point about the environment, saying that Chinese electric vehicle development exists either way. But when there is no demand, the creation of these electric vehicles is going to go down. So the impacts they are having on the environment, on immoral practices, is going to go down. Okay, and now moving on to my way. So the affirmative has tried to frame this debate as electric vehicles versus gas cars on our side, but this is not the case, and I need to set in stone that by putting dependency on our own industry, we give leeway for development of our own electric vehicle industry. Because if we are taking away the competitiveness of these Chinese vehicles, we force ourselves to develop our own industry because American people depend on the auto industry for transportation. I mean, it's a huge industry. So if you're taking away the Chinese industry and the Chinese auto industry factor in our own playing field, then we have to develop our own industry, and this gives us access to the following impacts. So one, long-term auto industry stability that is not dependent on China and the geopolitical tension associated with it. Because as I mentioned before, China is a very unstable country right now. They're having issues with many countries around the world. The world is in a place of huge tension right now. I mean, everyone is in conflict with each other. So what happens if all of these people, all of these impoverished people, as they're framing it right now, who have access to these Chinese cars in their world, what if it all goes away? What if China decides to stop the production of these Chinese vehicles? What if they decide to stop the supply to America? What happens then? Because if everyone is depending on these Chinese on the Chinese auto industry, then we have no plan B. We are not developing our own industry, and we have zero plan B. If something happens, what if China goes to war with Taiwan? What if China goes to war with someone else? What happens? We cannot be completely reliant on external factors for our own country. We need to be self-dependent, and that is what is so important in this debate, because that gives us access to other impacts, such as environmental impacts. Because when we have auto industry sovereignty, then we can actually control how we are developing our own auto industry and how we are actually carrying out these practices. So we have talked again and again about how China is so much cheaper, how they have more efficient practices, but that is because they are cutting corners. That is because they just want to make as many cars as they can. And the more if we reduce these tariffs, then we are telling them, okay, we want to introduce all the supply you have. We want all the electric vehicles we can get. And that is just going to force them to become more and more efficient, as they call it. But that just means cutting more corners, which is getting worse and worse for the environment. So we win on the point of environment. But if we focus on developing our own auto industry, that way we have more resources and more subsidies to develop our own environmentally friendly industries and practices, and that way the United States can set a standard for the entire globe to become more environmentally effective in the auto industry. Because, as I said in my first speech, the United States is a very influential country that a lot of people look up to for standards, for practices that's going to set a standard for the whole world to become more environmentally effective. Because, oh, sorry, not 5 minutes. Okay, thank you for the speech. Okay.
Great. For a quick off-time roadmap, judges, if you're both taking notes on sheets, I would just put this in a new sheet. I'm going to go over the general broad point of economy, which both teams have contentions on, and then the point about the environment, all right? I'll do a little weighing at the end. Is everyone ready? All right. My time starts in 3, 2, 1. Judges, let's get right down into the nitty-gritty on the line by line. First, our opponents tell us that even with this 100% tariff currently in place, Chinese cars are affordable. First, look towards the statistics. There is not a single Chinese company currently on the market that is selling much, much more electric vehicles than American cars. Let's look towards why this is. As I said in my first speech, the average BYD car in China costs $18,000. With a 100% tariff, it's going to be $36,000 right off the bat. Include the shipping costs, include the cost it takes to get it from port to your country, to your city. It's going to be significantly more expensive than just getting an electric car inside America. That is why this 100% tariff is really, really good at reducing the amount of Chinese cars that get into the American economy. We can see already that back when tariffs were 25%, there were a lot more Chinese cars in this economy. So we can buy that doing the plan actually makes more Chinese cars come into America. Okay, next on this point about decreasing automaking in America. We're going to say that firstly, they are interacting on two different markets. We said the majority of American EVs are currently for the luxury, for the rich people of the United States. Even though Tesla isn't the only company, they are the vast majority of the American EV industry, and they sell their cars for like $60,000. So they're targeted towards high-end, middle, upper-class investors. Now, on the other hand, these Chinese EVs will be made for the working man, the person that makes the average median income currently in the United States, meaning that these are two completely different industries. Moreover, our opponents did not respond to my partner's brilliant point that this Chinese EVs in the American market will spur more innovation in America itself. Currently, American markets are stagnating because they have no one to compete against. They're just sitting by themselves and making cars more and more expensive. If there are Chinese EVs in the market to combat them, then they will have to make cheaper and better cars. This is going to be increasing to the American EV economy. Next on this point, our opponents say that there will be less manufacturing jobs in the US because Chinese manufacturing will not move to the United States. Look towards the fact that when this happened in the 1970s with the Japanese companies of Honda and Toyota, we see that manufacturing did come into the United States because we welcome Japanese manufacturers into our market, meaning that they're less reluctant to come into the United States and make manufacturing jobs here. So by the fact that there will be more manufacturing in the United States itself. Lastly, our opponents say on this point of economy, they say that we should not give China this much control and that China can take away these electric cars at any time. This is absolutely true. Let's look at a two-world analysis. Under the affirmation world, which is our world, we give China the opportunity to bring dirt cheap cars into this economy to help the average working man make cars more affordable, save hundreds of dollars every year, with the small chance, maybe a 5% chance that China takes these cars away. Under the negation world, the people of America don't have these cars in the first place. There's a 100% chance of no cars coming to the economy. Just doing a little comparison here, our opponents have a 100% chance of no cars coming to the economy. We have a 5% chance. Purely on this probability, we are winning this point. Next on this point about bad trade practices on China's part. Our opponents tell us that China is doing aggressive bad trade practices, but the only one that they can concretely name is that the government is subsidizing electric vehicles. The United States does the same thing. We literally have a tax deduction for people that buy electric cars inside the United States. This is done by all countries. Moreover, this 100% tariff actually isn't reducing any bad trade practices that our opponents can name. We have 100% tariffs right now on these electric vehicles, yet China is doing the exact same thing as they were doing before. Thus, on this point of economy, we believe that we are winning every single point. But Judge, more importantly, let's go on to the environment. Our opponents only tell you two things on the environment. First, our opponents tell you that China is using bad environmental practices to produce these electric vehicles. But we have proven time and time again, electric vehicles, while they may be emitting some things during production, they're going to be on net very, very good for emissions and the environment overall. Once again, extend the stat that was conceded through the PM and the NG that basically says that electric vehicles are going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by half of the current amount from gas cars. This is really, really important. Secondly, our opponents tell us that United States markets will eventually catch up to Chinese production power. We're going to say that this is just untrue. We're going to say that even if this happens, it's going to take a minimum of 10 or 20 years to get the United States into a completely industrial economy, and by then it'll be far past the 2030 UN irreversibility deadline for climate change, which is going to mean that oceans are going to be acidifying. It's going to be 120-degree summers in California. Overall, it's going to be really, really bad. So now let's look towards what our opponents dropped on the environment. Our opponents have conceded the fact that tailpipe emissions are going to be really bad for the local environment and global emissions as well. Firstly, we see that 1/3 of all new asthma cases are caused by tailpipe emissions. This is not an insignificant number. This is millions of people every single year across the globe. This is going to be really, really bad and probably going to be worse than the economy because it's going to take hundreds of thousands of dollars to repair your medical bills if you have things like asthma or other conditions that come from climate change. So we're going to say once again that the environment is probably the biggest issue in this round. And because our opponents have vastly undercovered every single point we have on the environment, and that the point that the environment should come before the economy, we're winning on this point in the environment. But judges, even if you don't buy that on the economy, buy the fact that having Chinese EVs will reduce costs for the average working family, of whom 11.1% of are in poverty, and we are reducing gas prices and increasing manufacturing jobs. Therefore, I urge a strong vote for the affirmation team. Thank you. All right, good round.
Good round.
Thank you for judging.
Thank you.
We can step out for a sec to
Thank you for
give you space for
judging.
decision.
We aren't having a talk anyways, so.
Right.
You guys are welcome to stay.
Okay.
Did we see the ballots on the packet?
I think judges disclose at this tournament. Right?
I'm gonna disclose them.
What?
I'm good. Are you gonna disclose?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Are you gonna do a verbal?
As long as we're allowed to.
I think we are. Are you gonna do a verbal RFD or write one up?
I
We
think.
usually do both.
Okay.
Just step out for a second.
Go back and have it
Oh, do you have the rubric?
This thing is for points?
Yeah. I can take a picture and give it back to you.